Hey everyone, welcome to the Third Culture podcast, where we discuss culture, we tell life stories, and we explore the journey to healing. It is your host, David Martin. Thank you for tuning in today, and we look forward to spending a few minutes talking about culture today. So if you haven't done so already, I would invite you to listen to the previous episode, the introductory episode called This Is Where It Starts, because that gives a bit of a baseline as far as my background goes and a little bit of the purpose and intent of this podcast. So if you haven't done so already, please do so. And without further ado, let's get into this episode. All right. So today I want to talk a little bit about what I just mentioned, what I call the tagline of the podcast, discussing culture. We tell life stories and we explore the journey to healing. I want to break those three things down briefly over the next few minutes. So number one is discussing culture. And if you know me, you know that I enjoy discussing those things, the different cross-cultural experiences and lessons and principles that I've learned and that I've noticed in other people. It's something that we live and breathe as a third culture individual. If you're a third culture individual, you know what I mean. And it's something that we eat it, we breathe it, we dream about it, we're going to wrestle with it, we love it, we hate it. And sometimes we do all of this at the same time, it seems like. And I remember, just a brief story here, discussing all of these things around the dinner table at home. You know, when I still lived at home, and when I lived in Honduras, and it seemed like every dinner time or whenever we were around the table eating, which was a central part of our family life, we would discuss these things. We'd be talking about, politics. We'd be talking about the culture that we lived in Honduras and how to best relate to it, and all the things that come with that, assimilating and trying to contextualize things. And so we would have really hours long discussions about some of these things. And there's some of my favorite conversations that I've ever had. And so that's part of what we want to do here, is discuss that. And with that, to build an awareness that hopefully it carries on the rest of our lives. This isn't just something that we were aware of and discussed when we were growing up and living in that particular culture. This is an awareness that we carry, that I carry even now. And it's just an excellent tool. I think it's one of the most powerful skills that a third culture individual has, is the ability to discuss multiple perspectives and to listen to someone else's experiences, to listen to the lessons that they have learned, and to apply those to your own life. So I'm excited about discussing those things. I'm going to do some of those myself as a solo host here, and as well as bring other guests on that can speak to that as well, maybe even more qualified people. Number two, we're going to talk about life stories as well. And so one of the other characteristics, a big characteristic of third culture individuals, is that we're interested in other people. We're interested in their stories and their background, what brought them there. And some of that is caused, depending, I think, on the nature of why you're in a host country. Maybe that might be a humanitarian mission, it might be a religious mission. And some of those contexts are give themselves a little more easily to listening to people and discussing their stories, right? So maybe the job that you were involved in or the service that you were providing to that population and within that culture obviously involved listening to them and learning their culture and all the things that come with that. And additionally, the other thing I'd love to get into is not only discuss life stories from maybe people we've met or the lessons that we've learned, but I want to bring on guests who have interesting life stories, and I know quite a few people like that. Maybe they're not famous, they're not all this and that and the next thing, but they genuinely have some really good things in their life. They have some tremendous life stories. I'm a firm believer in sometimes the best stories are the ones that they're just normal people, and you would never realize that the person you just talked to at the store, the person that hung out, at wherever you were, maybe at your school or maybe some event, has just a tremendous life story, and you're getting to see maybe just a very small percentage of that person, and in reality they've got so much depth to them. So I am really excited about bringing on people who have really good life stories, really interesting stories and things that they can share with us, right, to maybe teach us and provide awareness on different subjects. So I'm really excited about that. And lastly, but certainly not least, talk about the journey to healing. And maybe you wonder, well, what connection does that have to culture and all the things that you've already talked about? Well, one of the things that third culture individuals face is reverse culture shock. And we'll talk about that particular subject in another episode at some point. But the truth is that moving around and living the high mobility lifestyle that is being a third culture individual does produce a lot of cultural shock, a lot of reverse cultural shock, and it can make things difficult to process, and you struggle with identity and confusion and those kinds of things. And so there's some things that happen within that need to be addressed. The second thing, and this is more personal, is I've personally at a young age experienced some severe traumatic events, and I don't necessarily know that I'll get into some of that in the future, but it's been a journey for me. It's mixed in with being a third culture individual. It's so intertwined, these layers of life, that exploring the reality of being a third culture individual has also sometimes forced me uncomfortably, and sometimes I've done it willingly, but it's made me grapple with the different layers in my life and how it's affected me, both positively and negatively. There's certainly both of those things. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, and that has more to do maybe with the past, but looking into the future, I also want to talk about, finding purpose, because that's something that as a third culture individual we face, feeling unrooted, maybe feeling in some shape or form homeless. We're going to talk about finding purpose and establishing and maybe building long-term relationships and how to invest into those things, because that's something that I'm learning myself. And one of the maybe negative characteristics, if you could put it that way, is that as a third culture individual, being highly mobile, you're used to short-term relationships and friendships because you move around and other people move around. That's the circles that you run in. And so shallow relationships are common, and real deep friendships and relationships that you can invest into and also be invested by are sometimes few and far between, and that's just the nature of it. And it's a very common problem, and I call it a problem because it's something that can be solved. And so I'm certainly learning how to do those things myself. But just to do a little recap right there, we're going to talk about culture, some of the differences and the ways that we deal with it. We want to build awareness of other cultures, and I want you to explore those differences, look at other people, and don't look at the differences in a negative light, but understand a little bit about the context of where that person is coming from. And secondly, we're going to talk about some life stories. So we're going to hear from some other people. I'm going to share some of my own stories. We're going to have a series on some of those things. And we're going to talk about healing as well. So personal inner healing, and as well as finding purpose and building and investing into long-term relationships in the world that you currently live in. So that's what we want to get into here in the future. I see a lot of good things coming as we build, and I'd love for you to share some feedback as we go along with this as well. So take some time today to appreciate the differences in others, learn from other people. It's certainly something that I want to continue to do. And if this podcast and if this particular episode has benefited you, if you've enjoyed it, I invite you to share it with someone, give it to them, tell them to listen to it, and provide their own feedback, because we're always looking to learn from other people. Thank you so much for tuning in, and stay tuned for future episodes.